As a part of our ongoing pre-budget coverage, we are discussing what will make the budget for Bharat click. There have been a threefold increase in the central government's capital expenditure over the past 5 fiscal years. The surge in capex is expected to continue into financial year 25 with predictions of a budget that will help India shine. There are suggestions, of course, of a potential boost in budgetary allocation, particularly for roads, railway sector, which will be a focal point, of course, for the government's growth narrative. There would be greater thrust towards ports, airports, infra in general. That is the expectation. Let's talk about how infrastructure will be pivotal to the budget 2024. Joining us is Rajeev Talwar, former CEO DLF. Also with us is Srinath Sridharan, policy researcher and corporate advisor. Srinath, I want to come to you first. Thank you very much for taking time out. You know, when you talk about infrastructure, the kind of pump up that we have seen in the budgetary allocation, the capital expenditure for that matter, 3.3% of the total GDP of financial year 23. Do you think that number is going to go up this year? What sort of expectations do you have as far as government's ability to spend on infrastructure is concerned?
Yeah, I think the government's ability to spend will depend a lot on the disinvestment and the revenue accrual that will happen. But the fact is, the intent, can they increase this and sustainably increase it, which means going forward for the next 10, 15 years, can we have this? And I'm bringing a lens on infrastructure. While we have seen enough infrastructure growth in the last 2 terms of this government, more importantly, this is a time I think we will whistle the green bugle, the green transition of all our sectors, the net zero 2070 target. I think it will start off across all infra. So from that lens, I think we'll have to see two. One is the new infra that will come up all across. How green will they be green? And can we spend more? And two is how do we retrofit the older infrastructure to become positively green? So which means that we're going to need far more number as a percentage of GDP. I would think probably at some point in time we will cross 4.2, 4.3% of GDP, despite the size of GDP growing.
All right. Rajeev, thank you for taking time out. Good to have you on Newsline. You know, one of the concerns over the year has been that the private sector hasn't really matched up to the government spending when it comes to infrastructure. What should be the key priority areas for the private sector at this point in time? And how can the government really, you know, pump up private investors to make that offering in this year?
I think Mr. Sridharan has said very, if I'm getting the name right, pardon if it's wrong, that yes, disinvestment will be a long way to go for getting the private sector to come in, because those are somewhere, those are assets which have been created, and getting hold of those and to make further investments will be a big push by the private sector. But all the same, I think what we are likely to see in the budget is that the government push on infrastructure will be very much present, and it will only increase. You've seen the development of roads, airports, ports, railways, bridges. I think we've just surpassed, in the last 10 years, we've surpassed all the 65 years before that. So this is likely to remain, because that is what is, in fact, providing Gati Shakti to the entire economy. And hopefully, this will also lead to the creation of many more new cities which are required to provide employment and manufacturing facilities in the Amritkal. If we are, I mean, by the time we are 100 years old as a country, independent country, we need to have many more cities, largely also to provide a fair and equal opportunity to the poor. The government's done a very good job while creating rural jobs. You know that Manrega is already getting a higher outlay, as recently announced or recently stated in the newspapers. But more than that, whether it's housing, whether it's electricity, whether it's water, whether it's toilets, there's been a lot of investment, and that probably creates a large amount of employment in the rural sector, which is to cover up the gap between what people are saying that the employment figures are not so good. But I would really hold that whether it is, I mean, in the the metros, we are the fifth largest metro country in the world, and whether it is roads, whether it is flyovers, whether it is the rail systems, there's a lot of investment going there, lots of jobs being created. The pandemic came in and a large number of jobs have been created, whether it's delivery, whether it's tourism, whether it is hospitality, whether it's aviation. So there is the likely benefit is visible to everyone now. Therefore, being the fastest growing economy amongst the top five, this I think holds very good for India, that the government's priorities have been very well marked out. They are very well stated, and the economy has been excellently handled by the government led by the Prime Minister, but also the Finance Minister and the Governor RBI. So one should expect that whether it is for women, whether it is for farmers, whether it is for youth, and especially the poor, because if we are to go and develop infrastructure where the poor, there was a very nice line which I may remind everyone here. When the opening of the Ram Mandir and the Pratishtha there, Pran Pratishtha, then it was said कि अब राम लल्ला टेंट में नहीं रहेंगे, एक दिव्य भव्य मंदिर में रहेंगे. Believe me, for the poor in this country, where in every city, town, they stay in 50% of them stay either in slums or in unauthorized colonies. I think that is the next big mission which will come in the third government of the Prime Minister after the elections, hopefully.
You sound very
And
confident that the government is coming back. It's a good thing that you sound confident. But sticking on to infrastructure, it's a valid point that you made with respect to providing housing for all. And since you have an expertise, Rajeev, on housing, on commercial development, from that point of view itself, do you think the government's thrust towards rural housing would increase at this point in time? There's been a lot talked about urban development. Government had put in substantial sums of money, allocated that money as far as urban infrastructure is concerned. How about rural infrastructure? Because in the last 1 year, one type of housing that hasn't really done well is the affordable housing segment. That hasn't really picked up. Do you think there could be some thrust towards that in the upcoming budget?
I think the next big mission for the government of India and for the people of India is to provide affordable housing, but on a rental basis. The 4 crore homes which are already being built by the Prime Minister's Awas Yojana are mainly in rural areas, and they provide a lot of employment and a lot of consumption for everything which is to make a 2-room or a 3-room house. But what we really need, if we are to plan for more than 87 crore people who are expected to stay in cities in India, we therefore need many more cities. But primarily our infrastructure for living respectfully, giving security to women, both financial as well as emotional, is requirement of what we call 1 BHK, which is a 300 square feet house with 1 bedroom, 1 kitchen, and a big hall with a toilet and a bath. I think that is the big mission. It will probably, if we are to provide for 50% of the people, that will be about 400 million, 40 crore people, which is 8 crore homes to be made. And that, I think, is the next priority, which will continue from, let's say, 2024 till 2047 to make this. And it will cover both the aspects. Number one, employment. As you know, construction provides for a lot of informal employment also. It also used to include women before, but now if they shift to cities, it will provide education for women as well as healthcare, and therefore much better gender participation. And the next big thing is what India requires besides employment is manufacturing. Now, in any kind of construction sector, especially homes, because largely the ports, airports, and also road infrastructure and bridges have become mechanized and specialized.
Right.
But when it comes to manufacturing for homes, then whether it's cement, whether it's steel, whether it's ceramics, whether it's glass, whether it's wood substitutes, whether it's green options, I think
Yeah.
all this will provide not only the manufacturing boost, but also an employment boost. I hope
Absolutely. I think
my
let's keep
fellow colleague
manufacturing
will.
aside, and if we can just stay on track for infrastructure, that's the story we're discussing. Srinath, I want to understand from you, isn't it about time that the government actually incentivizes green construction, ESG enabled buildings, and overall just this whole thrust on sustainability needs to result now in some sort of actionable agenda by the government? Because we understand the multiplier effect of infrastructure being built, but I think the focus now has to move towards net carbon zero, carbon neutrality by 2070, and for that, construction industry, infrastructure industry has to lead from the front.
Yeah, I think very clear sustainability or going green is a given. But the sooner we get there, what is amazing or surprisingly shocking is this: we don't even have a formal green taxonomy in India yet.
Exactly.
Uh, so if you don't have a taxonomy approved by the ministry and the regulator RBI, how are the banks going to lend? So I go back to the old Asian Paints ad, right? Mera wala green.
Right.
Mera wala green is very different from Aapka green. And that is where the greenwashing and green shaming is going to happen. So one, I think we have to recognize that the transition towards green won't happen overnight. It will take time. But sooner we get there, because the pricing mismatch that we are going to see in the years ahead, that if you're not a ESG compliant or ESG certified entity, if you're going to borrow money from the international markets or even the bond markets, it could be expensive for you.
Okay.
Two, the Indian corporates who are looking to go abroad, the sooner they get to green, whether it is the packaging that they use, it is the material that they use, the raw material, or the entire value chain has to be far more ESG compliant.
Right.
And I think there we have a challenge as a country. We'll have to develop a framework that is also culturally or socially attuned to India. We cannot bring the Western lens of ESG framework and say, let's say, child labor or governance, very, very broad metric that we use. The Indian context could be very, very different. And I think there lots of work is set ahead for SEBI in
Right.
terms of what is the ideal ESG framework.
Absolutely. So, the corporate, rather the sovereign green bonds is something that were introduced in this financial year. Do you think there is merit in exploring increasing the allocation and perhaps bettering the coupon rate on sovereign green bonds? Because that is something which will automatically fuel greener investment, and linked to that, or maybe de-linked to that, I don't know, correct me if I am wrong, but this whole push on electric highways and green highways is something where perhaps the government should finally put more focus, especially in the advent of FAME 3 likely to be announced on 1st of Feb.
Very good point, Kartik. Yes, theoretically, yes. Practically, there's a hurdle that we need to cross. The total proportion of bond market borrowing by corporates is still very, very poor. So
Okay.
unless the corporates start borrowing from the bond market, we will never see them vacating banks who can then potentially focus on retail and SME and MSME. So today, fundamentally, the Indian banking structure still caters to the government and the top-rated corporates, which is why I think there is pervasive incentive here for corporates not to do anything. But the
Right.
moment they have to hit the bond market, whether Indian, domestic or global, to raise money on green, their behavior could fundamentally change towards the better.
All right.
All right, and that is, of course, as far as green infrastructure and the possibility of that in India is concerned. Rajeev, Srinath, thank you very much for taking time out. Thank you for joining us here on Newsline. We continue to bring you all the highlights of what are the expectations, the big expectations from the budget right ahead of that crucial budget announcement on 1st of Feb. Keep watching Newsline.